of Indigenous people, and to recognize the ever-present systemic inequities stemming directly from past wrongdoings, and strive to commit ourselves indefinitely to respecting and reconciling this long history of injustice for all peoples. The Omaha Table Talk, thank you. The Omaha Table Talk was initially recreated in Omaha in 2003 by the Social Justice Advisory Committee of Catholic Charities in Omaha. And in 2012, Inclusive Communities acquired Omaha Table Talks and shifted to a larger public discussion over comfort food. We have several partners in this as well. We have a queer table talk where we partner with Out Nebraska, an Asian American Pacific Islander table talk where we partner with the Nebraska Asian American Leadership Alliance. And finally, this year, we entered into partnership with Echo Hawk Left Hand and Nicole Benegas, who are the co-founders of the Native American Community Partnership of Omaha Metro Area, or NACPOMA. And we have a Native and Indigenous table talk as well. So we have table talks in partnership with them over the year. We are a hybrid event. We switched that a few years ago. So we have folks online on Zoom, trying not to forget about them. Alexis is helping run that Zoom room. We'll give a little bit more about the logistics in a moment. And then of course, us in the room. We would like to thank our sponsors and acknowledge the Lozier Foundation, Cox Communications, and American Family Insurance. Thank you very much for making this possible tonight. Thank all of you for coming out. Thank you to our wonderful panelists and to all of our supporters. Thank you to our wonderful caterer. We could not do any of this without you. We do record the panel conversation, so this will be recorded, but when we go into breakout rooms, that will not be recorded. So we turn off the record, then we have conversation, and then we come back into the large group setting, we'll hit the record button again, and then we'll publish this on YouTube in about a week or two. It'll go up and you can see the replay of this or share it with others who weren't able to join us tonight. Of course, I'd like to acknowledge all of our volunteer facilitators. If you're a volunteer facilitator and you know you are at this point, you may be called upon soon to become one. Can you raise your hand? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'd love to have those folks here to help facilitate the conversation. We also have ASL, American Sign Language Interpretation. They're online today, so they'll be pinned and you can see them interpreting. And we also have an auto closed caption feature as well. So you can close capture this, that has been enabled. We also partner with World Speaks for Spanish interpretation online. So if you do need Spanish interpretation and you're on Zoom, just message Alexis and she will connect you with the interpreter. Also, for those of us speaking, whenever we do speak, please remember to speak clearly, to take pauses and keep a consistent pace to help with the interpretation. Following these guidelines, we allow the interpreters the opportunity to translate accurate information to the audience. I think that's all I have to say other than what's going to happen for the rest of this time, which is we're going to hear from these amazing panelists. I'm going to hand it over to Vanessa, your moderator, in a minute. They'll talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll put it to the audience, and you all will have table conversations, and there's some questions that will guide you through what you heard and learned tonight. And then we'll come back into a large group, and the tables will share. Also the breakout rooms, you'll go into breakout rooms online and you'll share some of your big takeaways. And then we'll have some final thoughts from our panel. And if we have time for any Q&A from the audience to the panel, we'll have some space for that. And then we will close for the evening. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our amazing panel.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Vanessa Martinez-Hernandez. She, her pronouns. I will be moderating the conversation, and we'll go ahead and kick it off and just get started. I'll ask you all to introduce yourselves. And in that introduction, please connect to the folks here with us, how you identify to this topic and how it relates to you.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Maria Valentin. And first of all, I wanted to give thanks to the Inclusive Community team. You guys are awesome. You know, you have been providing the forum for people to learn about other culture and how we can better interact with each other. So this is amazing. I'm originally from Puerto Rico. born and raised in Puerto Rico. And many of you know, where is Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico is in the Caribbean Ocean. It's a small island. It's 100 miles long and 35 miles wide. But, as small as we are, it's a beautiful place to vacation, to have good food. We are, there is Cuba, and there is Haiti and República Dominicana, and then there is Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico was colonized by Spain. And so that's what we have all in common. The Spaniards came looking for gold and silver and spices. And boy, I tell you, they found their gold. They found everything they wanted. And Puerto Ricans are a beautiful mix of different founding sources. I have ancestors from Spain, of course, Spaniards. I have ancestors from Africa, Africa's slaves. The Taino is our indigenous group. And then personally, I have French descendant because my grandmother married a French descendant. And so we are different colors. I'm really dark and I love it because I can't resist to the sun. But my father was a white man with green eyes. My grandmother was a white woman with blue eyes. And so how do I identify myself? I am an Afro-Latina, 100% Afro-Latina, because I carry that African flavor and I carry that Caribbean Latino flavor. And so.
All right. Now I have to follow that. So my name is Lina Traslaviña-Stover, and as simple as the question is, how do you identify yourself? I'll give you the answer for where I am today. I think, let's see, I got it. I was born in Colombia, and I came to the States for the first time when I was 15. I've been in Nebraska for about 22 years. So if you do the math, I've been in Nebraska longer than I was in Colombia, which is an identity crisis on its own, just so everyone knows. When I would argue my first 5 years in the United States, I was Colombian. And don't dare you confuse me with anybody else, because I would get very defensive. There is this patriotism about Colombia being the best country in the world, honestly. And I bet you the same is said about India being the best country in the world and United States being the best country in the world. So after a number of years in the United States, I started to recognize the power of identifying with how others identify me. So with the ascribed identity, which is being Latina. So I went from being Colombian to identifying also as Latina. And what does that mean? And it's precisely this, what do we have in common? That it's not tacos. It is that history of colonialization and our history that is a very traumatic history, because our roots also involve some heavy religion persecution embedded in our own history. So there is power in being Latina. So I identify as Latina. 2016, I believe, is when I got my citizenship. So I think this is the first time that I will say out loud that I am therefore a Colombian American. I have to sit with that identity for a second. I'm going to let others talk.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks again to Inclusive Communities for creating this space. My name is John Benitez. One thing that we all have in common here, said Vanessa, sorry, we're not Mexican. So I'm from Honduras. I was born and raised in Honduras till I was 8 years old. And then moved to United States. First lived in Maryland and then in Illinois, then eventually in Omaha. So I've been in Omaha since 2003. And this is my home, right? So that's over 20 years now that I've made this my home. Like Lina, I spent most of my life in Nebraska, which has made it kind of just a different, unique experience for myself compared to so many other people. And with that, one thing that I'll say about other thing that kind of brings us all together is the story of being an immigrant in the United States. As for most of my life, I was also undocumented, which that meant so many different barriers, so many different things that I couldn't do. But one thing that I really had a hard time with for the longest time was my own identity, right? Like, who can I trust to talk about where I'm from and what my situation is, right? So yeah, I grew up in the Ralston area, which if you look at Ralston now, is a much more diverse school than what it was 15 years ago when I was there. And so I was one of the few Latinos. I was one of the very few Hondurans. It was me and a couple other cousins that were there. And really, it did make this thing where I didn't, for the longest time, when I was young, I didn't want to identify as a Latino. I wanted to assimilate. I wanted to be just like my friends and fit in, which made it really hard to really accept that for myself and also my immigration status, right? And it didn't really hit me till later where I was like, man, I've just have lost so much of my own identity that has caused me so much pain because of it too. So I'm going to more details on that later, but really the thing that I think, when it comes to all of us here is our own personal experience and being able to see how the Latina community has grown and really become more diverse and just so much different representation that we're able to even have just in this panel too, which is amazing.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So I know we touched a little bit on some of the things that we share in common, but let's talk about maybe some of the stereotypes or misconceptions that people sort of lump all of the differences together with.
Well, one of the things that I would like to share at this time is, Puerto Rico was colonized by Spain, and then we were under control of the Spaniards for 400 years. And then the American-Spain War happened, and then we were ceded to United States, and we became a Commonwealth. And by becoming a Commonwealth, Puerto Ricans are American citizens. That's one thing that is different from the Mexican people, from people from Central and South America. We can travel freely in and out of United States, and we don't need a visa. Our sisters and brothers are different. They need a visa. And so that is one of the biggest differences among us Latino from the Caribbean and Central and South America.
I'll continue growing this conversation about citizenship and perhaps the modes of incorporation. Because one of the things that is very interesting is that this ethnic group, Latine, it's comprised by a very heterogeneous group, right? There's a lot of differences between all of us. With a few things in common. Colonialization, that piece is very, very, very important because that is the one thing you understand now why Spanish is also spoken in most of Latin America, Central America, etc. But the reality is that the modes of incorporation, the ways in which immigrants from different countries and how they are accepted or welcome into the United States does vary by country. And Puerto Rico, not being a country, being the Commonwealth, but they're citizens, right? So there are rights and there are inherent benefits that come with being a citizen. Colombians, the diaspora of Colombians so far, up to most recent years, has included a lot of educated individuals. So people that were likely coming from, movement because of war, internal civil war in Colombia. But if you think about it, the movement happened, rural people moved to the big cities, and then the big cities people, whoever could afford it, move out of the states, out of the country, right? So when you think, I'll talk about some of the privileges that I've had. I came when I was 15, but I came and I knew English because I went to a bilingual school. So that allows me to incorporate into the society in a very different manner than people that do not have that background, right? And the truth is that we can look at the long history that the United States has had with Latin America and Central America in terms of what has happened with the land, indeed. We have in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, a long-standing Mexican community that comes from the 1800s when Colorado was Mexico. So one of the stereotypes, by the way, is that we are all new immigrants. And the reality is that we're talking about many generations settled here in Nebraska for many reasons. Now, newer generations have settled on the eastern side, I guess, of the state of Nebraska. And then we have the 1.5 generation, which is the generation that was brought by their parents when they were younger. I'm a first generation immigrant, and here I'm going to pass the microphone to my 1.5 generation.
Yeah, and I think to that topic of being lumped together, not only for immigration status and kind of how different countries are treated, it's also about the community that you go into, right? Some communities are hard to settle in and to really be able to connect with other people in your own culture and identify the same way as you. Personally, I know for us, when we moved to Maryland, that was a really traumatic experience. Part of it because there just wasn't a community there to really make us feel welcome. We were welcomed by some family members, but then it was kind of just like, here you go, figure it out. It was hard. It was hard to do as new immigrants, and that's a big piece that I think that kind of the beauty of kind of the diversity that we have now in the United States and the inclusiveness that we can build is like, how does our communities become better places for that? The other part is, being identified as all Latinos are Mexican, right? Like that's a common thing that is always thrown out there. And I know for me, it was always that assumption that I was Mexican, and clearly not true. But I was also identified as Indian just because of the way I look. Even the way that my name is spelled, people were very confused about that too sometimes. Like, so ultimately what I want to say with that is that it's truly the opportunity for the individuals to get to know people, right? And I think as a community, we, you know, I think we can always do better at that. And so yeah, so it's one of those things that I think brings us together, but also to recognize that the individual aspects of different communities, and not only even within the countries, right? There's so much diversity within the countries in Puerto Rico, Colombia, and Honduras. You know, Honduras is I really love, one of the things I really love about Honduras is where I'm from in Tela, one of the northern sides of the country, is more of the touristy area. But there's a strong Afro-Latino community there too, which for the longest time is and continues to be discriminated on too. And so I think that's even within our own Latino Latina community, is we should ask ourselves, like, hey, how are we treating each other, right? Like, how are Hondurans and Colombians treating each other, and everybody, right? And within different countries, there's like stated kind of rivalries and stuff like that become sometimes ingrained in the way that we do things. And so always kind of thinking about, like, hey, like, we're all in this together, but we're all like also unique, and kind of help each other grow in our new communities.
I think we're good. Okay. Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about maybe some of the things that are happening in each of your communities. Try to keep it Omaha specific if you can, but if you wanted to like branch out to other areas just happening in general, please share.
That's good. You know, before I move into that question, I forgot to mention something that we Latinos have in common. And it's a cultural peculiarity, because when I walk through that door and I see a friend, the first thing that I do is I just give him a hug. And for us, that's how we embrace our sisters and brothers. It's just part of our culture. And so anyway, I needed to say that because I love kisses and hugs. And then you're saying what's going on in Omaha, and maybe I just gonna mention a few things, because at the state level, we do have the Nebraska Latino Commission that has been advocating for the Latino community in Nebraska. Then we have another group that is called the Nebraska Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, that is really vibrant and helping businesses to embrace the Latino community. And then moving to Omaha, you know, we have Colombians associations, we have Peruvians, we have Venezuelans and Panamanians. These groups, they get together to celebrate, you know, their culture, to remember their country and what we do in our respective country. We have professional groups like MILPA. MILPA is a group that gathers young professionals to learn about each other and to share information, networking. Facebook pages, like, you know, I don't know if you remember when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. I mean, the island was devastated. And so a lot of states opened the door to Puerto Ricans, and they created a Facebook page that is called Boricuas in Omaha, Boricuas Puerto Rico in Omaha. And then that page we disseminated information relevant to Puerto Ricans in Omaha. I mean, we have nightclubs that people go and dance salsa, merengue, and cumbia. We have cultural celebrations in Omaha. I mean, I came 35 years ago with the military. My husband was an officer and said, I gotta find me a place to dance. And so we found a place to dance. So there's nightclubs that you buy salsa, merengue, and all that. I will be remiss if I don't mention Ollas at UNO. Olla has been critical in understanding the differences in the community and creating policies and creating environments where we can learn about each other. Then recently, and I'm so proud of it, Bellevue University opened El Camino Latino Center. And that center is to help students and their families with anything. Many organizations have offices there. They help them with healthcare, with the Nebraska Latino Commission opened an office there. And so that is something really wonderful. You know, Omaha is changing and have changed, and we're bracing the Latino community. Then on top of that, we have organizations here in Omaha solely dedicated to support Latinos. You know, the Latino Center of the Midland, the Central Americas in Lincoln, the Centro Latino in Iowa. You know, it's becoming a common thing that we gotta build organizations where Latino feel welcome to go there and seek assistance. And then the Mexican consulate. We now gonna have el Consulado del Salvador, el Consulado of Guatemala, just to continue to support those countries here in United States. So I wanted to mention that.
I'm not sure how well I'm going to answer the question, but there's a lot of things that have been mentioned that I ought to say something about. I think it's important, as I mentioned, the three kinds of generations that we have, first generation, 1.5 generation, and then second, third, etc. I want to introduce you, imagine, my kids. I married someone that is Nebraskan and who is white. By the way, I was racialized as white or growing up. So I came to the States and then I was no longer white. That's also, it messes with your identity in one way or another. And my kids look very much like their dad, and their last name is Stover, and their first names are very much American names. My kids, according to the birth certificate, are Hispanic because we had to answer that question. And by the way, there wasn't a Latino option or Latina option. Otherwise, I would have picked that. We can talk about what are the differences, etc. But according to the census, which is one of the reasons why we are using all kinds of terms, by the way, the reason why we're asking questions is because it's a big gain from the civil rights movement that we need to count who's here to see inequality happening. Imagining if we don't count, then we don't see inequality, although just like Asians, the group is really, Latine it's too large of a group to be included in just one specific ethnic group. Going back to my kids, they will have to figure out at some point in their lives how they're going to identify themselves. Because like before in the United States, if you pass as white, I don't pass as white the minute that I start speaking. I realize that because I have an accent and I'm told that I'm not. So I'm not. It's okay. But my kids, they don't have an accent. They will be put in a position where they are going to either assert themselves as one way or another. But that is the new generation of Latina that is also there. That's why we see that second generation, third generation Latina in the United States are less likely to speak Spanish. Now, the thing is that we now have the internet. And I remember in 1997, I would call my parents on Sundays for 15 minutes, and it was $80 for those 15 minutes. So it was a weekly call on Sundays. Today, I call my parents every day for free via WhatsApp, and they are speaking Spanish to my kids all the time. So the connection with our roots today that we have the internet changes things, because I am able to really show my kids what it is to be Colombian. And it's not this long story about, well, and someday you're going to see it. They have lived it. Now my son, who's 8, has already said, people in school are telling me that I'm Colombian and I'm not. Okay, he's right. He's not Colombian, but what's wrong with being Colombian? And what, think about what is the conversation that is happening, that he wants to assert himself as, do not other me. And I'll stop there, because those are things that are happening in Omaha. See how I answered the question?
Yeah, no, and I mean, there's so much happening. I think that's good. That's a unique kind of cool part about it. Yeah, one thing that came to mind, and Maria, even as you were talking about all the different organizations and things that are happening, how a lot of that started so organically, right? The Chicano Awareness Center, which is now the Latino Center of the Midlands, right? It was based on like, hey, what are the needs of the community and how do we meet that, right? And kind of being flexible in the way that they do things. And that continues to be the thing, right? Because ultimately the community should communicate to what the needs are. One kind of a unique example, because everybody loves to eat food. I mean, one of the reasons we're all here, right? Obviously, the wide range of Hispanic restaurants across Omaha is beautiful, right? And now I am so proud to like see like 2 Honduran restaurants here. If you haven't gone, Mi Bella Honduras is great, but Sabor Catracho also incredible. So try them both. But kind of a unique thing that I saw when I went to a Nicaraguan restaurant in 168th and Harrison, most random place to have a restaurant, Latino restaurant, next to a gas station. And there's, I think it might be the only Nicaraguan restaurant in Omaha, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. But either way, it was really cool to see the owner just interacting with people. And he, one thing that he had told me he was doing, that he was like gathering a list of all the different people from Nicaragua that have been coming to the restaurant. And then just like this community has been building over time. And like, I think at that point, it was like near 100 people that had come talk to him about kind of what they're doing and just being in the community. And so I think that's the things that we see a lot. It's just the organic things that we see sometimes in our homes, sometimes in our community, to the point of the consulates too. I want to bring that up a little bit, because that can have such a huge role on just the access to resources that people need. The Mexican consulate, Salvadoran consulate, having just more of those in Omaha makes it a more welcoming place for people. They can get the services they need. I'm from Honduras. The closest consulate here is in Chicago. Terrible reputation for serving people, unfortunately. And I've had to kind of deal with that whole process. I've had to go to consulates in San Francisco, Atlanta, and has created just this chaos, right? And for me, it was just to renew my passport, which was a leisure kind of thing that I needed, but more that I wanted actually. But I was always thinking as I was going through this process, it's like, man, I have the resources and the privilege to be able to travel to a new city to do this. What if I didn't? Like, what if this was an emergency? What if I needed to go to Honduras because one of my, grandparents or parents is like, ill or something? And so that's something that we always want to ask ourselves, like, hey, is your community meeting the needs of who's here? And I think that's something that is going to continue to change because Omaha is continuing to change and becoming more diverse day by day.
Thank you so much. We're coming to our last question, so keep that in mind. We have like 3-4 minutes. But I know a lot of you have sort of shared different identities. So Latina, Latine, Hispanic. I'm just curious if any one of you want to share what that means to you so others can understand the large diaspora of how people identify in this community.
The Latin, Latina and Latinx is basically like a neutral gender type of concept. In my experience as a Puerto Rican, and I kind of did a quick research when I saw the question. But Latinos like to be called Latinos and Latinas. And the Latine and the Latinx is being used very little. It's less than 4% that people are using that term. And so, and there's nothing wrong with letting you or letting everybody know I am a Latina. Love it.
So I'm a sociologist. I should have said that at the very beginning. Because I've been reading the 4% the entire time that I've been in academia, because Latinx and Latine is is newer. It has been used in the academia for many years now. Now, academics, we don't agree on everything, and sociologists, we don't agree on everything. So there is all kinds of different ideas, but the idea of the Latinx term is precisely to be more inclusive, especially to the trans community, right? Or to the non-binary community. Now, Latine, actually, the movement happened from Latin American up, because Latinx, the letter X is not a letter that is used in Spanish very often. And in fact, the pronunciation is tricky. We pronounce it more like a J, Jota. So there is this idea of, why are we letting our own language be colonialized by using the X at the end to signify neutralism, when we already have the ending in E in Spanish that also signifies neutral positions. But the truth is that the Spanish language is still a masculine language, where when we talk about the people, oddly enough, that was a bad example because I was going to say la gente, which is both female and then gente ends in E. But anyways, but you see how it gets complicated. I'm going to attach it to both culture, and I'm going to bring a personal experience here. I also learned German, and in German, the sun is actually female and the moon is male. In Spanish, the sun is male and the moon is female. And then here I am talking to English speakers here that you're like, females, males, what are you talking about? They're X, right? We're not going to agree, because this is simply the glasses that we were born with. Anytime that I picture the sun, it's male in my head. And I know that in Germany, I should picture a female, and then here, an it. But you see how that it's not as simple as saying, oh, I get it. The only thing that I can get is that I have lenses on. So these are the glasses that I was given. Completely forgot where I was going with that story, but it was a good story. Now you know, and I'll let you close it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. No, it's so interesting because like Latine and Latinx, I just love. I can get back to you. But like the terms are like I love them because they're so much more inclusive, right? Yeah, because the language is so gendered and complex. It creates this neutral kind of language, but I cannot help myself calling myself a Latino. Like it's every time it just comes right away. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? And but yeah, I think also like the way that we talk about just our identities too is important. Right? Even pronouns. One thing that I started to use more is like he, him, él. When I'm using my pronouns to make sure it's also kind of aware that for a Hispanic that to make sure that they see that as a someone that can be an ally, that can be more open about their identity too. So yeah, so I think it's and then our immigration status, I think that's another one for me personally. I'm so strong about using that as part of my identity. Not only Honduran, now I'm not even a citizen, but I still sometimes use like Honduran American, Latino American, but then I really want to highlight that immigrant part that was undocumented, right? That's been part of my experience. So yeah, so our identities really just play a huge role.
Now we have to put the lenses that we have on right next to what the law says. And the law in terms or the policies in terms of identity often come defined by the census. So every 10 years, our identity gets shifted a little bit. As of 2000, we were able to, for example, pick multiple races. So all of a sudden, I could be Hispanic and I could be white, although I was told that I wasn't. So then what am I? Other? To the point that honestly, whenever I go to get a driver's license, the next time they ask race and ethnicity, I'm like, what did I put last time? Let's remain consistent. But that is really a shock to the system to be able to now claim some pieces of your identity that you didn't even know you were missing. But now you can claim them. So now you are missing them. From the history of census, at the very beginning, we use last names, which we know is clearly problematic for many reasons. Think of my children, little Stovers. And then that has moved into including all kinds of different names. Hispanic, looking at the Spanish-speaking countries, which would exclude Portugal. And Portugal has an important colonization history. Brazil has an important has a colonization history with Portugal. So they are two Latine. And I think that's where I ended. That's what I'll end now. But so follow the census, because the truth is that whenever the census question changes, our identity also changes. And we are talking about the racial dynamics, not only we bring our lenses to look at food and to look at the sun and the moon, but we also look at our lenses, how we treat each other in terms of race and ethnicity. So whatever inequality that we have in our home countries, chances are we're bringing it here, where people, for example, and colorism is a very salient thing. I was with my baby, he looks like his dad, I told you already, and someone would compliment me because, oh, he came out white. And I'm like, I don't know if that's a compliment. Thank you, or should I be offended? But you see how it's these little interactions that just remind you I'm other, or I'm being othered, which is part of this identity conversation.
Okay, we will go ahead and start our share out. Oh, You can record this portion. Okay, perfect. Why am I even asking you? Does anyone want to start telling us a little bit about kind of what some of the highlights were, things you talked about in your group? This could also be anyone on Zoom. Feel free to just unmute yourself. If you are in person, Veronica will run the microphone to you. Yeah.
Okay, so we just kind of started our conversation with going off of what the panel spoke about and seeing if there's anything that our group related into forms of that conversation. And we have Mexican people, she's a blend of many things. And for us, we're Asian. And of course, I think a lot of the thing that we talk about is how we identify and how that becomes like a crisis at some point in time, whether or not it's a product of your environment and people group you a certain way, or maybe it happens privately within your own home in which that, you hang out with a certain community and they think you're like too American, or for us, like we're too Asian, and it makes it really conflicting for us. And as time passes, especially when you start becoming romantically involved with people who are even more diverse in race, your children then face those challenges of what their identity means to you, similar to what Lina spoke about, even for us, like we're having trouble with it, but now we have these people who are like 8 different races, and now you're not really sure what they're supposed to be. I know for a lot of us, we kind of talked about how that journey is often seen as a choice, and it shouldn't be shamed of whether or not that person is ready for that journey. Like we shouldn't be putting people down because they're not connected enough for their culture. I mean, we already have to deal with that regularly. Us trying to explore more of it, and then for that group to feel like you're not making the cut yet, so you can't really be a part of this community. Like for a lot of people who maybe lost their language and their culture, and now they want to discover more of it. I know personally for me, I'm Vietnamese. So as I grew distant from my parents, I lost some of that Vietnamese and therefore became a little further from my culture. And now, although I want to be more a part of my culture, it makes it more difficult because my Vietnamese is not as strong anymore. So we talked about how as it is important that that journey is a choice that that individual person decides to make for themselves, that we shouldn't ever shame people for not being on that journey yet. So I think that's kind of what we talked about. I know we talked about a whole ton more. That's just TLDR.
Thank you.
Who would like to go next?
Are we just answering the first question or?
Just whatever
In
you,
general.
like, talked about. What are the highlights of what your group
Okay.
talked about?
We talked a lot about identity and descriptions and how those change for individuals based on their own kind of life experiences, how you identify as a child, as an adult, what identities are put onto you that I think that ascribed identity versus sort of that self-identity question. And then some of the things, just being aware of other people's realities. The phrase was used, not from here nor there. And whether someone describes themselves as Mexican-American versus American-Mexican, based on their own experiences, kind of things along those lines. Just the fact that identity can be very fluid based on people's where they are personally and how culture defines them as well. Anybody, anything else? No? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. This group, that group? Okay.
So we talked about a whole bunch of things, and amusingly, the thing that surprised us was that the Chicano Awareness Center had changed its name. We all missed that. So that was one of the odd things, but in terms of changing and adding to our concepts, we talked about how communities aren't monoliths, and also that colorism and socioeconomics play roles in some very complex and unexpected and surprising and depressing ways. And we actually spent quite a while talking about how we were each going to take action. And the one that summed it up was Sherry. And she basically said, do better, teach better, and be intentional. And I think we all sort of decided that was it. Thank you.
Did you all want to share?
No, it's okay. We're gonna in English.
Well, I will try my best. So she had to leave because she had some errands to run with her kids, but we got to know each other, and then we spoke about how diverse we are, even being all Latinos, how diverse the Latino community is, and the difference we have among all the different countries. Even with that, how similar we are at the same time. She works for the city of Omaha, and then she explained to us how the city is working for improving or increasing diversity and inclusion among the community, and all the programs they're working on to help the Latino and the African-American community, pretty much.
Zoom folks, who wants to go ahead from either group?
I can talk.
Awesome, go ahead.
Okay, I don't know if you guys can see me. What we talked about, you know, like the gentleman that was talking before me, we also talked about, you know, how broad the Latino culture is and how we are, because, you know, at the end of the day, we all speak the same language, but it's different. So I seen this quote before that has stuck with me ever since I seen it. And in Spanish, it says, somos de diferentes culturas, pero con la misma herencia, which translates to, you know, we have different cultures, but we come from the same inheritance. And that very much represents Latin America, because, you know, like, for example, if I were to go to like Argentina, you know, I'll be able to get around, I'll be able to communicate because I speak Spanish, but at the same time, you know, I don't know like what their culture is about, like what their typical dish are, and, you know, and it's just stuff like that, you know, because it's so broad and there's so many ins and outs. And, you know, it's also great to understand like different cultural backgrounds. And then we also talked about how some feel like Latinx, the word Latinx kind of like divided us in a way. But, you know, what we can do now is, since that word is coming up so much and, you know, the new generation is coming up, all we have to do is just, you know, educate the best we can.
Awesome, thank you so much.
I can share from our group. So along those lines, we're talking about the evolution of languages, but at the same time being respectful of the individual and finding out how they would like to be identified as. And that, you know, some of us have friends who will be very clear that, yes, please use Latino. I don't want to be called Latinx, Latino, whatever, you know, the different other terms. And then it was really interesting hearing some of the reasoning and the justification for the different ones, and the more inclusive term, the Latine, and being more appropriate, being the more inclusive. We talked about what we could do as individuals, for instance, learning and education of others, but also learning about our neighbors and getting to know people, not making those assumptions, and then finding out more about them and their identities and backgrounds, and understanding the diversity involved.
Thank you so much, Yoon. We are close to wrapping up, so if folks do need to leave, they can, but we always like to end with kind of like a, what is your takeaway? Did you have a better way of asking that? Panel, do you have any like last words of wisdom for us? Like one final takeaway that you kind of want to offer to all of us here?
You know,
The only one that didn't get the microphone is the one that speaks.
you know, at the end of the day, you know, we are Latino, Latinas, Hispanics, whatever people want to call us. But one thing that I learned in my country is that you embrace differences and you maximize similarities. And coming to the state of Nebraska helped me realize how privileged I was. My people from our sister and brothers from Cuba, you know, it is a suffering what there was happening over there. You know, our sister and brother from South America, Mexico. Every time that I see that 2, 3, 4,000 people trying to come into the United States, it just make my heart so unhappy. And so if we're here, despite of our accent, despite of cultural background, we gotta understand each other. We gotta work for each other to support those that are coming to the state and to help colleges and universities and the healthcare system. We could support our community by embracing, you know, those entities. And if we have time to volunteer, if we have time, like the inclusive community, this is something that, you know, we have to duplicate this somehow on another time. But share it with the Nebraska Commission, the Nebraska Hispanic Commission. Do something like that when they come together, because people need to understand that we are all not Mexican, but at the same time, we speak the language, we share a lot of commonalities, and so we need to help each other. And so
I think that intentionality is one of my takeaways, that words, thank you, my phone, my watch always finds stuff. That the words that we use are indeed very powerful. So if we all live with the intentionality of trying to get to know people, an understanding that we all have salient identities, right? I don't walk into this room and saying, I'm a divorced person, but I am, and it is part of my identity. It's just not part of my salient identity. So I think that allowing for the conversations to happen, so people tell you what is most important to them, because of course, how we look and maybe how I sound might be the easiest way to make a connection. That might not be the way where we connect. So intentionality and intentionality.
I think my takeaway is kind of what we continued talking after we were done with the panel, because there's just so many ways you can have this conversation. We were briefly got into colorism, right? And we then our own privileges, being educated or not having a strong accent or stuff like that, right? Like those are the type of things that not only for Latino or Latina community, our Asian community, or different kind of communities across that live here in the United States, like what an opportunity to continue having those conversations and continue to like learn from each other. So I think that's kind of like the big takeaway. Like if you're all here, like that's, if you know someone that's from different backgrounds, like talk to each other about like, tell me more about your identity. How do you want to be referred at, and kind of be intentional with the way that you approach us. So I feel like I just learned so much even just hearing everybody here. So thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So the only thing I would add is that, like, even as a person who holds this identity, I still have so much to learn. So knowing that, like, each one of you who doesn't hold this identity, you have to learn and we have to learn from each other and continue to teach and be intentional, I think is very, very important, and to hold grace and space for other people to help in those ways. That's it. Thank you.